Got another video coming out. Nothing intended for legal purposes, all educational, history, that kind of stuff. Um, this one's on yard accidents. And some of the questions that were asked were how they happen, why they happen, how can one prevent them? There's, depending on, or better yet, no matter how you keep your dogs, contain your dogs, yard accidents can happen. And especially when you're first starting out, because we're not experienced. Even if you've had other animals, even if you had other dogs, the pit bull's a little bit different in that they're prone to confinement. They understand confinement because generally we separate them at a young age, and they fuss and they fight and whatever when you chain them up or even put them in a kennel or however you contain them. Once they settle in, once they become accustomed to it, even walking on a lead with a harness, a collar and lead or whatever, sometimes in the beginning they don't like it. They're not accustomed to it. They understand what confinement is, but over a short period of time, usually they adjust to it, they accept it. But depending on how you keep them, there's different ways that yard accidents happen. And like I said, they generally will happen to you. I don't know anyone that hasn't had a pit bull that hasn't had some kind of accident. The obvious one, and the one that I seem to get questions about, what do I do about this and what do I do about that, is when the dogs are kept together. They may be okay as they're growing up. They may be okay even as adults. But at some point, something sets them off. Could be food, could be you, meaning they want your attention. You're giving one more attention than the other, or, they're jealous or whatever it could be. During a female in heat, and the female don't have to be there with them. It could be a female in your yard and you got two males inside that have lived together, and they start smelling that female. Something will trigger them, that macho dominance instinct for breeding or whatever it is. And it could be, like I said, over food. I had two females and they were grown. They didn't even show that they would fight in the traditional manner if you faced them up or anything like that, and they lived together. I had them out in the yard one time, and there was a bone out there, a beef bone or something, and they both noticed it. They went over and they started fighting over it. That simple act triggered them. So there's different things that will trigger them when they're together. And my advice to anybody who asks me that, like I said, from around the world, is keep them separated. I don't think trying to train that out of them or train them to behave is effective a high percentage of the time. Now, if they're raised together and they have certain training and you've trained them from the beginning for, from the time they're small till adulthood, you have a better chance of them behaving if you monitor them. Still, I wouldn't leave any two dogs alone, pit bulls alone like that, because it could happen at any time, even with obedience training, even with command training, even if they know they're not supposed to. Something could trigger them. And if you're not there to handle it, it could be a bad accident when you get home. So, but as far as yard accidents out in the yard, with chain hookups, everything that they have on them, from the collars to all the hookups to the chain, the clips, carabiner clips, cold shuts, whatever you want to think of, the chain itself, everything wears out. It has wear and tear on it. The only difference between a smaller chain and a larger chain is the larger chain takes more time to wear out. But just the fact that they're dragging it on the ground and moving back and forth, and they're putting pressure on it and stress on it, it's going to wear out. The bull snaps, the ones we used to use, they were higher quality steel. That changed to later on they were lesser quality steel, and I never used one bull snap on my dogs. I always had two bull snaps in case, even on the good quality kind, because through wear and tear it's going to break. So if one breaks, they're always held on by another one. Now if you're lazy enough to let both of them wear out, then that's on you, but that was just my way of securing it. Same thing with a collar. The collar will wear out, and the more active your dog is, the more chances of stuff, the sooner the stuff will wear out, and even the better chances of them escaping and getting into a yard accident, because they're active. A lot of times they're always thinking, how can they get loose? They know they're confined. They know they're in that collar. And if you don't check the collars for wear and tear, they could break. And it happens fast. A lot of times you think, well, it's going to tear a little bit and it's going to tear more. No, usually once that stress is put on them to the point where it's torn or it's worn out, it's just a matter of them yanking on it, tugging it, walking it, whatever situation it is, and then it just pops open and breaks. Same thing with the D ring on the collar. I never use those because those will break. So I always use the O ring inside the collar. I'd leave the D ring on, but I didn't use it to connect the dogs. Even when I had them on a lead, I just unhook them from the chain and use the O ring to have the lead. Now again, when you do that, the O-ring moves around the collar, so a lot of times it'll put wear and tear on the part that connects on the buckle and all that. So if you do that a lot, that's going to wear out. And you see a lot of times pictures where dogs have frayed collars and worn out collars. They get stiff with time and they become weak. So same thing with the swivels you use. The swivels will wear down and they'll eventually snap. And you can see it on a chain. If you study the chain, the part that rubs the ground the most, you know how it comes down off the collar and it goes to the ground. That part that touches the ground the most, that's the part that wears out the fastest because there's more friction there, I guess. And you'll see it get flatter and flatter and flatter and flatter, and then boom. If you're not paying attention, that's why we always advise people to check your equipment all the time. And it's just a cursory check, glance, make sure everything. You could do that every day. It takes a few seconds or a minute. Check all the swivels. If you're using axles, depending on the weather, depending on the soil, depending on where you're at, they can pull that axle out of the ground. In more sandy ground. And depending on how, some axles, they're only a couple of feet long. Some are 3-4 feet long. So it depends on the type of axle you have, the size, all that. And again, whatever equipment you're using to connect it to the axle, them going around and around and around moving, it wears that metal out. Metal on metal will wear out. Metal on ground wears out. Metal on grass will wear out. Metal on wood, everything wears out. So those are some of the causes of why yard accidents happen. It's usually our fault. We don't keep up on the equipment. One bad accident I had that I worked a dog, this one I real early in, is I had brass hookups. Brass. Yeah, it didn't take much for that to wear out and break. It didn't even wear down and break. He just snapped it because it was so weak. He was a bigger dog, 50 pound, 54 pound. And he just broke it. And I only had one brass clip. Stupid, I know, dumb, I know. Cost me a good dog, but it's a hard lesson. That's why a lot of the stuff I advise against, It's not because I'm smarter than anybody else or I know more than anybody else. It's because I made those stupid mistakes myself. And it cost me and it cost my dog. So always check the equipment. And another thing, another reason that causes it is when you put two dogs that don't like each other together. People like to see that. They're always hitting the chain. They're always screaming at each other, hollering people. It's impressive, right? That's what cost me a good dog, because these two dogs didn't like each other, and they were right next to each other. And all they did was hit their chain. Sometimes they would scream at each other. Sometimes it was just them trying to get loose and hitting the chain and hitting the chain and hitting the chain. Well, that brass bull snap broke. And the better dog is the one that got killed. He was a little smaller. He only had 3 teeth. He was the one on the chain. It cost him his life. Sometimes it's the dog on the chain that gets hurt the most. Sometimes it's the dog that's loose that gets hurt the most. And that doesn't mean just because they're close together that they won't have a yard accident. You can put two dogs that don't like each other, separate ends of the yard. One of them gets loose, they'll go past every dog in between to hit that one dog that they don't like. Because they talk to each other. They scream at each other. They talk crap to each other in their own dog language. So since pit bulls are such good escape artists, if they want to get loose, they'll get loose. And with the collars, the weight will fluctuate depending on where you live throughout the year. If you have 4 seasons like we do, in the winter they're heavier, spring and summer they're lighter. If you don't adjust the collar, where it's they gain more weight in the wintertime. You put more weight on them, so you have to loosen the collar. If you don't tighten it up when the weather changes, as they lose weight, that collar's going to be loose. They'll pull out of it. Some people that had escape artists like that would double collar their dogs. Meaning they had the thick 2-inch collar, like most normal 2.5, whatever it is. And then they had a 1-inch collar, smaller together. I've seen dogs slip out of those too. They'll just yank and yank and yank and yank till they pull out, choking themselves to death almost, but they'll get out of it. I think STP's champion Toro was an escape artist in that way. They double collared him, he still got out of it. So you have to always check your collar. You just put your fingers, if you can put 2 fingers in them, it's generally tight enough. But if you put 3 or 4 of your fingers in there, that's too loose. And a lot of times dogs, they won't try and get loose while you're there. They'll wait till you're gone. And then they'll figure out, all that time they have when you're not there, they'll figure out how to get loose. Some will try and bite their chain, some will yank on it, they'll yank the collar trying to pull the axle out, or if you have it in the ground. There's different methods of securing the dog. Most use car axles. Some people put the chain in a cement block, wait for it to dry, dig a hole, put the cement block out so it's coming right out of the ground. If you have a heavy rain and sand or whatever it is, dirt, whatever, a lot of times it comes up as the water recedes. It comes up closer to the surface, and with the dog yanking on it, they'll actually pull it out of the ground. I've seen that happen. Rare instances, but it can happen. So just looking at stuff sometimes, that's not enough. You actually got to get in there and check. You may have to dig a little bit to see if that block or whatever it is you're using is deep enough in the ground. So it'd be real hard for them to yank it out. And if they do, they still have it attached. But they'll drag it around, they'll drag it to the next dog just to get at them. Sometimes, you think the dogs are separated enough. What I've seen is people that have a bunch of dogs, they're closer together. You want to use up all the space you can. And generally they measure it, right? It doesn't look like the dogs can get to each other. Even if they flip around, or because they flip around, now they'll get to each other because their body's longer than from the chain to there. It's hooked onto them, face to face. They may be a foot apart, But if they swing around, that back end's going to get to the other dog, and he'll bite their tail or bite their stifle. But even then, I've seen people thinking that they're 12 inches apart or even a foot and a half apart is far enough. It's not. They'll figure out a way. You know, they either get lower, get higher, pull to the side, just to get a little nip of the other dog's foot. You know, when they're stretching out, their foot generally are in front of them. They'll grab a toe, they'll grab a foot. So a lot of times you think they're far enough apart, but they're not. And over time, even if it's just yanking on that axle, and by yanking and yanking and yanking, it pulls it a little more to the side, maybe an inch or 2 inches, and that's enough where they just grab a toe or a foot. And like I said, when they swing around, they'll grab their tail, grab their stifle, grab their privates. Dogs are pretty ingenious. They'll figure out a way to do it. And they're determined, and they got nothing better to do all day long in their confinement if you're not home than to figure out ways to get at each other. So that's pretty much chain hookups or whatever. Now, if you have kennels, and even with the cable run, it's the same thing. They have a lot more movement. They can put a lot more pressure when they hit the end of that cable run. There's a stop on it, so they can only go so far. But all that stuff, the cable, all this stuff can wear out. It may take years for it to wear out. If you use heavy-duty cable and high-quality steel or whatever, it's gonna wear out, or it gets kinked up, or dirt, rocks, or whatever gets in there. A twig might get in there and throw it off center, and the whole thing breaks down. You can only imagine what could happen to make something like that happen. Could be a storm comes through and a little tiny piece of branch falls off and it gets stuck in there, and then now the dog's wearing it out. Or just the fact of them going back and forth. And like I said, the more active it is, it seems like the dog is, the easier it is for them to get loose or break something. More mellow dog, generally you don't have that problem with them because they just kicking back most of the time. They ain't trying to get loose, but that doesn't mean they won't. So with kennels, it's the same thing. Whether you're using chain link fence or a different type of material that's more solid, the dogs sometimes they push against them, they jump against them, it loosens it up. It might pop a rivet or pop a snap that's holding it on. Or they'll yank it, right? If it doesn't have a top over it, they could jump out. Even if it could be a 10, 15 foot high open kennel, they'll climb it and get out. And even if you have it secured at the top, some will climb and they'll wedge themselves through any gap that they feel they can do it. They'll dig under it. Which is why on a lot of kennels, they're not just flat on the ground. They actually put cement blocks in the ground and then place the kennel on top of that, secure it on top of that. The cement block could break over time, but it's harder for them to dig out with that cement block because they have to dig down farther. They will do that. Now, hopefully you'll see it before that happens, but it's a preventative thing to keep them in, rather than just have it on the ground. Because if it's on the ground or even on the grass, you can have it level and even, but over time that's going to change. Water's going to hit it, rain's going to hit it, the dog messing with it will make it uneven. And once there's a little gap, the dog will notice it and he'll hit that gap. And a lot of times, believe it or not, they'll do it behind the house where you're not most likely to see it. They're actually in a spot where it's hidden from you. If you just go in the front of the kennel and the house is to the back of the kennel, and you clean up the dog and you pet them and you feed them and you wash it, right? If you don't look behind their house in the ground, you won't see it. Even if you're walking behind it, unless you walk behind it every day and check for any differences in the surface. It could be that one night that they actually dig themselves out and get out. or if you don't see gaps in the top, or you don't see wear and tear on the chain link fence, they'll get through a gap. I had a little dog, I talk about him all the time, Ronnie. He was a 34-pound dog. When he arrived, when Boyle sent him and he arrived at the airport, he had no fear of anything. Arrived at the airport, he had chewed his way out of the sky kennel. His head was sticking out of the sky kennel, happy as could be. He didn't really like sky kennels. So one day, we had him inside, in the sky kennel. We weren't in the room. He got out of the sky kennel, and when we noticed him loose, when he came out of the room, we went in the room, the sky kennel was still locked shut. He wedged himself out of the sky kennel. This, I'm guessing because I wasn't there, but he wedged himself out of the sky kennel, his whole body, without popping the locks on the sky kennel. It was closed. It was still locked. So needless to say, I didn't keep him in a sky kennel anymore. Right? So you got dogs inside the house. Some will learn how to unlock a door because they see you do it. So if it has a latch on it, they'll hit it with their mouth or they hit it with their paw. It has a knob or a handle, they'll hit the handle and open it. They'll turn the knob with their mouth and open the door. I've seen them do it. Dogs will jump through windows, close windows, bust the glass, cut themselves all up if they get amped up enough, if they see something, whether it's a cat or another dog on the street. They'll actually jump through the window or try to. They'll run through your screen door or your glass door if you have it on front, sliding door. They'll do all kinds of stuff. They want to get loose. Most of the time they're going to get loose somehow, so they have to be monitored a lot. They take a lot of care because they're not regular dogs. They have a mind of their own and they think of different ways to do different things. Dogs loose in the yard, we've seen them. Doesn't matter how high the fence is, they'll jump over it. They'll climb it and get over it. Could be an 8-foot, 10-foot fence. They'll get over it. Doesn't matter if it's wood, cement, chain link, whatever it is, boards. Not every dog will do it, but some will. And again, if they're digging out, it's usually behind a bush you can't see. Unless you go behind the bush or you get down and check real good, they're digging behind that bush to get out. They know you don't want them out. They know they're supposed to stay in the yard. So they hide it from you. They don't want you to know where they're trying to get out. So that could be an issue. Best thing I can say about how to prevent it is just that. Check everything. Know your surroundings. Get some experience with it. Know your dog. Always pay attention to them. I would say the best kennels for inside are those aluminum ones. They lock real tight. Now some dogs are crazy. They'll bite. They have rivets. They have rods on the side so they can see out and get air and all that, and in the front. But they're metal. They're aluminum, and it'd be real hard for them to break out of those. If I had dogs, that's what I use. If I had them inside in a kennel, it would be a aluminum kennel. And because it's aluminum, it's not that heavy. Not like steel. When you have to move it around or clean it out or whatever, tip it over to clean it out. So that's what I would use. So just a short vid, not too long, about yard accidents. That's some of the ways they could happen. Why they happen? Because dogs don't like being confined. Nobody likes being confined. They may become accustomed to it. They may become adjusted to it. They may accept it. But that doesn't mean that they like it. They would much rather be loose. So that's another reason to get your dogs out and exercise them, to relieve some of that stress and pressure from them being cooped up, even if they're confined to a chain, which is why I like chains. They have more freedom of movement, more area to move. And if you've got the money and the area, get a big ass kennel. 20 by 20 or 20 by 30. We were talking about that the other day. I forget where, but that's one guy had. I think his kennel one of them was 20 by 30. That's great. The more room, the better. Dog doesn't feel so confined. If you can't, even with the 8x10 kennel. You still got to get them out and exercise them. Bring them inside the house from when they're young. Teach them some manners, some obedience, so they don't tear your stuff up. Make sure the doors are locked when you're inside, and where the dog just doesn't, you know, if you go to the door, I mean like this, let's say you go to the door, you open the door to go outside. If you're not paying attention, he'll rush right past you and get out. He's waiting for you to slip up so he can get out. So you can find the dog before you go to the door. Whoever's knocking the door, they can wait. You know, because you don't want your dog loose. So some tips that you know I thought of on the fly. Like I said, not a long vid. Any more ideas? Why, what for, and preventative? Just put it in the comments, and I'll appreciate it. Thanks for your support.